Hello, everyone. No one here. Hello, everyone. Good stuff. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to support us on this journey today at this event. Before we start, I'd just like to pay special commendations, special thanks to the people who have gone before us, who have attempted to do this work. And I think that's of primary importance. So this is to the people who have done this work before us. Okay. So this is a student-led movement, and I'd just like to start by welcoming our student guests, particularly from Keele University, King's University, Queen Mary's University of London, Lancaster University, Goldsmiths, no? And our students from this university, University of Kent. I'd also like to welcome our academic colleagues in the house, particularly Sylvia, where are you? Sandeep, who traveled all the way from Paris to join us. And I'd just like to share a quote with you. And this quote is from Tuck and Yang, and I think it's quite appropriate for this event. Decolonization is not a metaphor. When metaphor invades decolonization, it kills the very possibility of decolonization. It recenters whiteness. It resettles theory. It extends innocence to the settler. It entertains a settler future. Decolonization, a verb, and decolonize, a noun, cannot easily be grafted onto pre-existing discourses or frameworks, even if they're critical, even if they're anti-racist, even if they are justice frameworks. The easy absorption, adoption, and transposing of decolonization is yet another form of settler appropriation. When we talk about decolonization, we're not offering it as a metaphor. It is not an approximation of other experiences of oppression. Decolonization is not a swappable term for other things we want to do to improve our societies and institutions of learning. Decolonization doesn't have a synonym. Without further ado, I will like to welcome our facilitator, Dr. Sweta Rajan-Rankin. Rajan-Rankin, importantly.
We can have ramen later.
Sweta, would you like to step forward, please? Sweta will be facilitating our student-led discussion today.
Thank you very much, Dave. I'll stay here if that's all right. It's absolutely brilliant to be here. My name is Sweta. I'm from SSPSSR. And above all, I am an anti-racist activist and someone who has very, very strong support for the decolonizing agenda. It is a privilege to be here and especially see the support that is growing from the ground up right here on the stage. My role I see as being a catalyst for further discussion, where the discussion takes place through your voice right here and from where you stand and what you have to say. As Dave said, decolonizing as a metaphor doesn't work. Decolonizing as a movement does. But we have, as all social movements tend to have, challenges in being able to create a coherent and cohesive voice that goes beyond our local context. So this conversation is to visibly bring together the different movements that are taking place in different universities, but also to identify and name the pain of non-belonging. So my very first question to any of you, please do jump in, there's mics all around. Why is the concept of unbelonging core to the decolonizing agenda? Yeah. Could you give us your name and also your university, please? Thank you.
It's on now.
Hi.
So my name's Aksa Ahmed. I'm the rep from one of the reps from Lancaster Uni. We have a Why is My Curriculum White decolonization campaign that's been running for a couple of years now. And I think the reason why unbelonging is central to the decolonizing movement is because with a colonized curriculum, there is not a platform of belonging for people who are outside of that narrative. So what's important to factor in when you talk about curriculums that haven't been decolonized is that they do not include a vast majority of specific narratives. Therefore, students cannot see themselves represented or reflected in that narrative. That's why that's why it's linked to the sense of unbelonging.
Mm-hmm. That's brilliant. Anyone else want to answer that question? Yeah, go right ahead. Oh, right.
Yeah, hi.
Up, yeah, go ahead. You first, yes, please. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm Yasmin from Queen Mary, Decolonized QMUL. For us, we have an interesting context in that our university is 61%, I use the word BAME for sake of this, so like non-white students. So you would expect for us to feel as though we are represented, but I think there's still a sense of not that being something that is celebrated but not reflected in terms of the curriculum and things like that. So the feeling of belonging is complicated in a place where you see a lot of black and brown faces in terms of students, not necessarily in terms of the academics, the lecturers are teaching you, and not necessarily in terms of the things you're being taught. So it's interesting navigating that particular context.
That's brilliant, thank you.
Hi, I'm Smaya, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm from King's College London.
Welcome.
I think unbelonging is interesting to think about because it kind of unites a lot of our experiences within institutions like this. We've all had very, very different experiences, but we've all felt that unbelonging. And it's interesting to think about in the context of decolonizing, in terms of like, we should be asking, do we really want to belong to these institutions that have been built on our oppression, on white supremacy, or do we want to create new institutions that are ours and like completely ours?
Brilliant, thank you. And you had something to contribute?
I mean, a lot of it has already been said, but I was just thinking about how the experiences that we have here impact our performance as well, and how we interact with other people here in university and with wider society, and just how unbelonging in itself is something that we carry in terms of our mentality, and I think it's very important for us to engage with material where we can identify ourselves, because we can tap into certain things about our cultures and society that allow us to extend ourselves beyond what we already see.
Brilliant. There's two themes that came up from your excellent contributions that stuck with me. I think the first one is the word navigating, how to navigate safely through spaces, and the other is what do you belong to? And I think I really love the idea that the notion of the university as an intellectual but also physical space that is actually steeped within whiteness is something that's not often seen by white host majority students and staff. And so to excavate the possibility of unbelonging, you have to keep making the case for why difference exists and representation matters. Could you perhaps talk to the labor involved in making diversity visible? And who does this labor, and what does that labor involve?
Hello, sorry. My name is Fides. I'm from Keele University, pronouns she, her. Again, when it comes to the labor involved in regards to decolonizing curriculum or the system is mostly falls on POC women and unfortunately black women. From my experience as a brown woman, actually lately, it wasn't that long ago, a couple of months ago, because Keele's Decolonized network shared our first open letter, and as representatives, we went to the SU's AGM in order we pushed the motion for the SU to openly support our agenda. And unfortunately, instead of having a civil and academic discussion, it turned into an attack on not just myself, but also my fellow colleagues here. But unfortunately, a lot of it fell on me, not because I'm the face or whatever. It's mostly because of the fact that it just so happens I'm the one who ended up being the spokesperson. In the last 2-3 months, I have received hundreds of xenophobic, mostly misogynoir hate. A lot of people who are PhD students and also lecturers who came in support of me face misogynoir also, despite being academics whose work is primarily on decolonization. It was practically insulting, but even worse, being called the ignorance of the student population, unfortunately. They always say, oh, you black and brown people, it's always about race with you. First and foremost, that statement is racist. Do not ever say that to someone. Second and foremost, decolonization does not just equal race and ethnicity. Decolonization equals equality of the genders, equality of sexuality, of ableism. I spoke like this in a group probably similar to how many people there are here now. I was shouted at by a white man and a white woman shouting. When I say shouting, they were practically screaming. They were red. That's how angry they were, calling me an aggressive woman. And of course, we know the connotations of this. And unfortunately, till now, I'm still getting those same messages on Facebook, which I have, and Twitter also, actually. And I have receipts that are still growing in size. When I tell you I have hundreds of screenshots in 90 days, that's too much labor for me and my colleagues, but a lot of it on me, like on a superficial level. And it's unfair. It's not, I would never wish it upon anyone, and those who have experienced it, they know, they're in solidarity with me in saying that it sucks. I want to not be there anymore, but I believe in this so much, but not for me, but for the people after us as well. I do not want to bring another brown, well, my current partner is a black man. I do not want to carry a black child into this world with this type of mentality.
All right, here you go. Yeah. Naima.
Can we hear? Yeah, we're good. So I think what's interesting about what Fides has sort of been expressing is that evidently the burden falls on black and brown people. We are having to explain the racism that white people perpetuate, then we have to do something about it, and then essentially we have to endure it as well. So there's this triple burden of things that we have to deal with and then also do something about. And just how, as you've beautifully explained, how draining it is, physically, mentally, emotionally. So we're trying to sort of fight against this injustice that we experience on a day-to-day basis, but at the same time having to continuously educate the people that are bringing about this oppression. It is very draining, and I think that we tend to forget what sort of impact this has on the psyche of these black and brown students, lecturers, leaders who are always having to carry the weight of to try and to make an anti-racist university, anti-racist society, when the actual people who are perpetrating the racism are doing nothing about it.
Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Lauren from King's. So I think, like, yeah, definitely with that. I think also then white people take the ideas that people of colour have like come up with and got the shit for coming up with it, and then rebrand it as their own, which is really, really insulting. And more than that as well, I think it's not just the fact that we're doing all the labour, but it's seen as the only thing we can do. Like, we can only do things in relation to decolonization or in relation to our own identity, like mostly based off race, whereas the white person is the objective. Like, they're the objective I. The rest of us are just subjective because of our own experiences, and that's apparently not okay. So they can go into like any field they want, they can talk about any like issues they want, but we can't. It can only be this sort of stuff that we're allowed to talk about.
Thank you so much. I mean, I need to digest all of that and just thank you, yeah, for sharing that. It seems like the moment an anti-racist agenda is called out in the open, it triggers a threat response from white institution. that is situated in and reinforced by structures that are meant to privilege certain communities. And I think there are lots of layers there about sharing your voice safely and fighting the fight, but a sort of visibility paradox. Do you find that? We're hyper visible and we're completely invisible. Does that resonate? Could we speak to that a little bit?
So I wanted to touch on a topic a situation that happened at our university, where our workforce and inclusion manager, a black woman who was working at our uni for more than 10 years, she had basically, all the burden was on her to basically diversify our university. And our principal went to her and asked her if our university was racist. She basically wrote an email to the principal, CC'd all the lecturers, and wrote a really long essay on as to why the university is racist. And some of our students printed that email, put it around the school or the university, and put it on the principal's door. And I think this is where about the idea of being invisible. Did anything happen? No. And it's our inclusion and diversity manager, she had a problem with the university. It's if it gets to that point where the lecturers are trying to fight, we have everyone who's trying to fight, but the institution is just racist. How can we change it? And I think it's about supporting each other, because again, it's a traumatic experience that we're constantly having to fight on and be at the forefront. And we're putting our necks on the line. We can get kicked out of university. Lecturers could easily lose their jobs, and what is being done,
Can I bring this back to the concrete? Yeah? One of the most beautiful things about the decolonizing agenda is it brings sophisticated, nuanced theory together with lived experience. And the concepts don't just live, in abstraction. They live in our everyday realities of both belonging and exclusion and erasure. Could you talk to me about some of the examples you can provide from your own experience of how the university can feel very excluding to BAME students as you traverse the built environment, the physical environment of the university, the spaces, the learning spaces, but also socializing spaces that can mean you don't belong? Yes. Yeah. If you could pass the mic down, thank you.
I think one of the ways which I've experienced that as an undergrad, as a master's, and now as a PhD over here at Kent is as an immigrant student. So as someone who has to comply with the Tier 4 visa regime, the hostile environment essentially makes it impossible for me to just live a regular life. In my undergrad, when I was struggling with massive mental health issues, I couldn't make it to classes, and I got an email from the visa compliance team saying that, we might have to revoke your sponsorship if you cannot provide us with fair reason why you haven't been making it to class. And I think in a way, speaking to the visible thing, the capital, the economic capital of this campus comes from the visibility from the international students. We bring the money here, but at the same time, we're completely disregarded. We are completely just disrespected. We are seen as people who will come and then just, the university essentially leeches off us and then just chucks us out. And it's incredibly disappointing. And I think knowing that feeling also makes it really hard to go through university life. And I think, and because of course there are immigrant students coming from not from the global south, also from the global north. But I think it's important to remember that even they experience the hostile environment policy, but they do not experience the added racialization that comes from that. Unless, of course, there are people of color who are migrating from there, where, of course, they will experience both of those things. And I think it complicates this issue of belonging, not belonging a lot more in that sense.
Thank you. Yes, over there. Yep.
So at King's College London, physical space is just very, very clear. You experience it. We have barriers at every entrance. We have additional barriers for the Muslim prayer room, which you have to get authorization for your card to be able to enter. And there have been some claims that these barriers are benign, that they're just there for security. But we saw last year when 13 students, the majority of whom were black and brown Muslim women of color, their access into the university was barred through the ticket barriers. through the ID card barriers, and the way their information was found was through like kind of digging up the data of who tapped in where and matching it with security footage. So you can't, like, that's the biggest thing at King's, like the barriers. You can't enter the university without feeling like you're being watched.
Thank you. Yep, Naima.
I think sort of just considering the physical space, I'm going to bring this out to you guys as well, but walking around the University of Kent, so I did my first year as a foundation in Medway, and my exams were of course all in the Chatham Dockside, and if I think about the physical space of the university and a place that I hoped I was gonna come and feel extremely inspired and feel like, you know, I could achieve anything, was the same place that when I walked around the Chatham Dockside, there was the remnants of Sir John Hawkins, who was the first slave owner. And you think about the ties that the University of Kent Medway has to slavery, and that being something that we have to walk past every single day if you do go to the University of Kent Medway. But that's not something that's entirely unique to Kent. You know, if we're thinking just in London, UCL can't seem to get rid of their eugenics building, which we all know is an absolute joke. And for those of you who don't know about eugenics, it's quite literally the biological way in which white people were made superior to black people. And so to think that those students at UCL have to walk around every single day and to look at that building, walk past that building, to think how that makes them feel, thinking about, forget this country, South Africa, for example, you know, the whole movement of the Rose Must Fall, it started there. And that's kind of come here now as well, thinking about Oxford, Cambridge. I know Queen Mary's have got their own issues as well. So our university doesn't look like a university that is meant for us, that we are supposed to walk around as freely as white people can, because we look around and we see things that are oppressive to us. And no matter how much we seem to petition the university, no matter how much we seem to be paying, we don't seem to have a strong enough voice compared to the donors or, you know, the people who are working so hard to ensure that these buildings and these statutes stay, even though it's so oppressive on our psyche.
I would say even in social spaces where it is targeted towards black and brown faces, where it's urban nights or grime nights, and you walk into the SU and there's extra security and they're picking and choosing who they, you know, pat down, and they're picking and choosing what you can bring inside, and all, you know, why are you wearing so many layers? It's just, I feel like it's not always necessarily the space itself. Sometimes even the mentality of the people that they bring in there just automatically makes you feel like you don't belong. Like, even though this is advertised for you, even though we want your capital and your money, we want it at a certain limit in a certain way, and you have to behave appropriately for it to be acceptable. So yeah, just wanted to add that.
Yeah, so on navigating spaces, I think it's, for me, my experience is really linked to visibility and invisibility, because in one sense, I'm really visible and I'm getting invited. So we have a really infancy kind of decolonized movement at our uni. We're just starting it, really. So within my department, I was asked to attend a meeting to talk about decolonization and how we can start the movement and give my opinions. And in that sense, I was really visible. But when I was speaking to a supportive lecturer, on the other hand, he was telling me of the dangers of that visibility. He was telling me I had to keep my grades up, I had to keep attendance, or they will, or any excuse, and they will kick me out for the work I'm doing. And that threat is just overhanging my life, because I'm third year, but this work is so important to me. And that sense of visibility is scary. But then the threat of that visibility is also shown, because I did like a really, really basic poster campaign outside of this decolonization campaign that looked at everything from race, ethnicity, ableism, sexuality, gender. And it was really just highlighting how different spaces on campus are really accessible if you are able, if you're cis or het or white. And I purposely didn't put any kind of logo or my name on it. But immediately on like Facebook, you could see the backlash, and people were just not getting such an obvious and simple context. So the threat of visibility is there. And I think it also manifests itself with the student union. So me and AXA, especially AXA, are seen as the face of this movement. It's not a great thing. I think you can sense that if you when you attend AGMs or when you attend any kind of forum where there's the ability to hold those in power accountable, our questions are overlooked or not answered, or our questions are always left to the last. People know they don't want to hear what our questions are. Yeah. So that, I think that's,
in a similar trend, I'm Monique, I'm third year politics students from Keele. In a similar trend, I think it's important to recognize like visibility and invisibility with regards to whom, because one of the things I've noticed ever since I've become part of this movement is that the way in which certain people will approach my friends, my colleagues, in comparison to the way they approach me because of the way I sound, because of the way I present myself towards white people, is extremely frustrating because it completely unacknowledges all the work that my friends are doing because of the way because they don't conform to what the power structures what the power structures expect from students. And so I find that that's extremely frustrating because again, like, it's putting this, like, placing the burden on me, even though, like, I'm maybe not, like, as confident to talk about stuff. So I think it's just really frustrating that there's a sense of conformity that that's expected if you want to engage with people.
It sounds like we have one more person who'd like to talk right at the end. Yeah. Do you have a mic? Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
I'm Tope from King's. I think also who our universities choose to platform constantly remind us that we don't belong. So at King's, we've had people like Tony Blair and Hillary Clinton come and speak, people that have destroyed the lives of black and brown people, and our universities are giving these people platforms to come and speak at the university. And when students protest, we're the ones that are surveilled and treated, brutalized by security. And also think in less subtle ways, our university is constantly reminding us. So King's had links with G4S, a company that profits off incarcerating black and brown people. These are who our universities are giving their money to. Like, this is where all the money we're paying for to get an education at King's is going to.
Brilliant, thank you. A lot of this reminds me of Sarah Ahmed's Politics of Complaint. Yeah. And the risk of raising your voice, but also the penalties that you have to suffer through. There's a different price to pay for belonging that involves a sort of securitized pathway. And I think all of that's come out very clearly. Could you speak to the connections between the neoliberal university, marketization, and very, very fitting for this particular moment in time as we're on industrial action, the connection between the two and the anti-racist struggle and the decolonizing struggle, and does one support the other, or does it actually undermine the effort?
There's so much to say on this.
Go for it.
But as soon as you said the marketization, just some context on me. I'm a history student, final year history student at Lancaster. I'm one of the only students of colour in our whole cohort because history is generally quite a white subject. I'm also on the brochure. Just thought I'd drop that in. I'm on the brochure. I'm all over the department. Yeah, that's me, unfortunately. But I thought that was really interesting because I'm literally superimposed in the center of this this booklet, brochure, which all new students see on their open day and the applicant visit days. And then you look at the curriculum, and literally the only modules that are in the whole continent of Africa are based on the transatlantic slave trade. Any module that is outside of Europe is centered upon colonialism. And I'm like, this is the image that you have of history at Lancaster, and this is what you give as history at Lancaster. So I just thought I'd drop that in to start us off.
The poster girl, I think that's absolutely, that's an image that will never leave me. Thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the most blatant examples of neoliberalism and marketization in our uni has been the way in which the University Executive Committee has weaponized the Race Equality Charter, because we recently won bronze, was it in 2018? 2018, and like ever since, like the whole process of even like gaining that award was based on the work of BAME, I think people from the BAME staff network, but the ways in which like the university basically just took that work, claimed it as their own, and like didn't even think to mention even like the work that was involved, like some people from this group contributed towards it, and even then like they had to fight to be recognized, and there was no like compensation. It was just like, oh yeah, some of our students, because again, whenever any BAME students have to contribute or want to contribute towards this work, it's always voluntary, completely ignoring the work that goes into it. So yeah, I think there is this like desire for universities to appear like progressive and liberal through having such awards, but they're really not willing to put in the effort, and like it's basically just a tick boxing exercise for them.
P.S. They basically just acknowledge they're racist.
If you could pass mic down, thanks.
Thank you. I think the way the kind of neoliberal marketization agenda also kind of intersects with these conversations is that one of the bigger things about the business case for the university is that it has to diversify its portfolio. And that diversification comes out in different ways. So you have the different programs that might come out as degrees that you can do, but also so if you go onto the Kent website right now, you'll see a lot of black and brown faces on the website, because a particular reason that those faces are there, because the university is currently in the financial crisis that it is in, is trying to recruit students from nearby spaces, which are, for the most part, spaces where you will see communities of color. But once people of color come into this campus, of course, the treatment is absolutely different. But also similar to Aksa's story, I am an alumni scholar within this university, so my scholarship for the PhD comes through alumni donations, which means I have to go and talk to all of these mostly white people about what my research is. And one of these dinners, they had 3 people up, and one of them was a black girl who they had a tagline of, as a poster girl essentially, of we have essentially insinuating that the scholarship has allowed her to come into the university and take on the research. But later on in the dinner, the person who spoke to that privilege of coming to the university and being allowed to do research was still a white woman. So even when we are present, when we can be seen, we still are not heard. And I think that goes squarely again to neoliberalization, because we are not something to be invested in. We are to be divested from, in that sense.
Brilliant. Thank you. Right, yes.
I think it's interesting to see how, kind of what you said about how the university prioritizes the people it receives funding from over its students. So what we found last year is that we had protests, we were doing a number of things to kind of protest the university for various reasons, but we weren't getting much of a response. And then we started sticking up memes around the university, like taking the absolute piss. And suddenly we were getting emails for a meeting, people were trying to figure out who had kind of published these memes, because it was attacking the reputation of the university. And then when we look at the students who were banned from university, the reason they were banned was because of the publicity associated with the Queen visiting, and they didn't trust us to not ruin kind of the greatest PR moment King's has ever had. So yeah, King's has like universities in general have a reputation that they are willing to do anything to uphold, and it always comes at the expense of, students of color, just marginalized groups in general.
Wonderful. If it's appropriate, could I invite our black male students from the Decal group to perhaps share their thoughts in general? What does it feel like for you to belong or unbelong to the university?
I think for me, when I first started at Kent, I realized that I came from a different type of environment where I'm used to kind of like, so head teachers putting in interventions in place for students to kind of equal up the percentage in terms of who's achieving amongst the school. Then you realize you come to uni, and in terms of help initially, I realized it's not the same in terms of help. I had to go out and almost search for what should already be there. So it makes it harder for me to actually believe it actually is meritocratic in terms of me being able to achieve the same way a white student would.
Brilliant.
Sorry, I think Joel just hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
Literally, with the meritocracy. I think we are taught somewhere along the line, be it at school or just in life in general, that if you work hard, if you work very, very hard, you'll make it, you know? And that has to be the biggest lie that is ever managed to fool people, because everybody seems to think or seems to manage to convince people that actually if you work hard, you do as you're supposed to do, that you'll make it in life. And it doesn't consider all of the sort of intersects of discrimination that black and brown people are facing daily, that mean that actually the reality is it doesn't matter how hard we work, we likely will not be able to get to the places that we want to be. And if we think about education and then think about the world in general, it's given to us, sort of produced to us as though the world and education is a neutral, level playing field. That it's a blank canvas, we all come in, and if you work hard, you'll make it. When in actual fact, our invisible lived experiences, the fact that most of us may or may not have a bunch of things going on at home, that means that we can't necessarily dedicate the amount of time that white students can actually give to their degrees, and considering how we are oppressed in more sort of ways than others are, mean that actually this meritocratic world that we all believe that we're in is not true for us, and that we have to work 10 times as hard as white people to get a fraction of what they have.
Thank you, Naima. Any other comments? Thank you.
My name is Munda. I'm a third-year law student. So growing up, I was always told that I would have to work 10 times as harder as other students in school, college, whatever. And as a child, I never really understood what it meant until I guess I reached adulthood. And I saw opportunities being presented to other people who perhaps, I perceived to have, not have earned it as much as I did. So growing up black and navigating the adult world, it often feels like you have to sort of act a certain way, talk a certain way. Almost there's a compromise on who you are in order to be perceived as equal. So I feel like as a black male, as one of the most demonized groups in the world, it's almost like you have to work extra hard to just to be perceived as equal to people who may actually be less than you. So
Brilliant, thank you. Any other yes.
Yeah.
Could I, sorry about this, I hope you don't mind. Could we stay with our black male students for the moment, just to make sure their voices are heard also? Yeah? And then we'll come straight back to you. Is that all right? Thank you so much. Okay.
Hi, my name is Oscar. I'm a third-year law student from Kent. I feel like with a sense of belonging, this never happened for me personally, because like the university tries to push this agenda of belonging with like the poster child examples they used to give, or it's sort of like facilitated by this idea of an interest convergence, which is something I learned on one of my modules. Like they tend to push this equal image to make everyone believe that there is a sense of belonging when there's actually not. In essence, it just feels like they're profiting from most of us anyway. So they tend to push this racial equality, like we're going to be there for you, non-black black people, but in essence it's not. And it happens in society as well. You see a lot of people like to tap into our culture, but then it's just for their benefit, not just ours. So the sense of belonging is it's never been there.
Yeah, thank you for that. Right, yes,
Yeah,
yes please, thank you.
Yeah, I think as a black male, I kind of share the same experiences with all the other black males that have experienced what they've been through. And I feel like before I came to the University of Kent, I feel like it was quite hard because I struggled with identity issues. I predominantly came here and I was thinking that I was Akin, because my name is Akin, I study law in third year. And I kind of found that I had to behave in a certain way in order to fit in. So I found that in my lecturers, they'll be speaking to specific people that come after the lecture to speak to them regarding how to get first. And those people will be are pretty much our counterparts. And I generally found out that I had to start speaking like them, start dressing like them in order to become part of that sort of culture. And then I had to realize that at Kent, I had to literally go out and find the help that was needed through the lecturers that really, really wanted to help me. And I feel like that helped me specifically. But I feel like this is an issue that is still ongoing and is still a prominent issue in universities.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, just to add, I felt like when it comes to the issue of like belonging, it's hard to feel like you belong somewhere when no one that looks like you is represented in a certain type of area. So like for me, that was a big issue in feeling like I belonged here.
Could we go back to you? Do you have the mic? Thank you so much for waiting. Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Fabi. I'm a first-year history and politics student at Lancaster. Just like kind of going on all of the points, I think when people of colour do achieve things, it's seen as a token thing that is given to you rather than something that you've achieved from your own merits. I've experienced that quite a lot in my life. I'm quite heavily involved in like student politics, and when I got elected for a few things, a lot of comments, even from some of my friends, they were like, "Oh, are you the token brown girl that that you got put into this position because the rest of the committee is white?" And I think even when we achieve, even if we work 10 times as hard, even if we achieve everything we want to achieve, it's still not seen as a personal success. At least that's how I see it.
One of the reasons I did invite our black male students to take the stand and to speak up is, and this is going back to your point about being probably the most demonized group, especially with young people and in society in general, but also at university. Just anecdotally, I'm a senior lecturer in social work, and my black male students they struggle so much in terms of placement. I've had older black male students who've been taken for cleaners, and they're on professional placement. They've been rejected from home visits. Service users have called the cops to say there's a dangerous person outside, and this is a trainee who's training to be a social worker. So actually, there's a sort of disjunct between the racism, everyday racism, that our students are experiencing while they train to belong to a profession they have every right to access. And a lot of this is not visible to the university. Do you feel like there's sort of a sense of white amnesia, that the university tends to continuously forget that it's white, has a whiteness basis to it, it's a white structure? And because of that amnesia, the work that is done by Decal students such as yourselves often can be a sort of constant source of sort of irritation, but also it creates a very strong defensive reaction within the university. Do you read to that? Yeah. If you could pass her the mic. Yeah, thank you.
I think the really interesting thing about King's, as someone has mentioned, like they do, like all the stuff they've done with surveilling students and passing information on to the police of like people from very like vulnerable identities. But one of the things that they've started doing as well is like taking credit for what students have done. So they simultaneously hate what we do, but love it so much that they want to take credit for it. And I just thought that was a really interesting phenomenon, and it's quite strange, like when you're in a meeting with someone who's on a certain council saying, "Oh, and I pushed this through myself." It's like, well, you didn't at all, actually. But thanks. Yeah.
Student in the front and then at the back. Yeah. Do you have a mic? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Charop, and I guess with like unbelonging, I'm an international student, and there's like there's a lot of, I won't say bragging, but like they really do push that they have like a high BME population at University of Kent, very diverse campus. But like every couple of weeks, you'll get an email if you're on a Tier 4 visa saying, these are the things you have to do, and like remember, and like sometimes you even double check because you think you've made a mistake, and like maybe you've given them the wrong address. And on top of that as well, I remember when, I think in first year, there was a talk about international students and working in the UK. And like after all of this conversation about employability and how there's so much support in the university, I think they said only about 3% of like international students manage to find work and stay in the UK. So it's very confusing, and even when they send out jobs and opportunities, almost always there's a clause that says they will not sponsor a visa. So it doesn't make sense. I don't know if they know that this is still a part of the university, but yeah.
There's an ambivalent relationship.
Mm.
Yeah. The student right at the back. Thank you.
I don't even think that it's like an amnesia. I think that's sort of like sugarcoating it. I think our universities are almost gaslighting us. They're sort of taking credit for our ideas. You know, that they'll have a few diversity schemes, and we should be grateful for that, and ignoring all the oppression we face and all the microaggressions that we're facing on a daily basis.
Brilliant. Naima.
I think we have to ask ourselves, is it a denial syndrome, or is it a deliberate act to withhold power? And I think that if you think about this sort of systematically, like certain narratives are obviously excluded, certain narratives are erased, and I want to say that on a systematic, on a structural level, that is 100% deliberate and 100% intentional. On an individual level, thinking about lecturers, seminar leaders, even universities and their ability to shape curriculums and things like that, that is essentially willful ignorance. Some educators, I feel, are unwilling to do that extra bit of work, because I think one thing that we're forgetting as well, we've all come through the same systems of education. The same people that are teaching us also learned what we learned in school. They had the same curriculums. So their decolonized minds as educators then means that they have to do that extra bit of work to decolonize their minds and then to teach us that. So that, I think, if you take that role on and you choose to become an academic or an educator or whatever it may be, then you can't continue to live in a willfully ignorant place, you know, because it's no longer your subconscious anymore. You've taken that journey, you know, you're an academic, and if the government controls the curriculum at a school level, then we at universities have the ability to change our curriculum, to shape it, and to no longer continue to give people these narratives that deliberately withhold power, deliberately withhold the truth, that then disseminates into other structures, into other institutions. These ideas then get taken into the NHS, the healthcare system, the police structures, parliament. We need to start at education and find a way of infiltrating that into other institutions.
Brilliant. Yes. If you pass a mic down to the end of the sofa, thank you. Oh, you already have one. Yeah, perfect.
I just wanted to give like a quick story that kind of exemplifies what you've said, and I've already shared it with everybody else on stage, but I was in a meeting with the Vice Chancellor of my uni, and I was talking about the experiences I've had of Islamophobia, but also the experiences that a lot of other Muslims have had, and he looked me like dead in the eye, and he was like, well, that's interesting because I eradicated Islamophobia 3 years ago, so... And I was like, so what? Like, I made it up, I don't exist here? Okay, that's nice to know.
Lady in the blue sweater, same sofa, yeah.
I just wanted to build up on your points, because, again, I think Yasmin mentioned this. Our uni, Queen Mary, is very, like, we're so diverse, like, we're the majority, technically, but that's not being manifested. But what was interesting is that with the strikes going on right now with the picket, one of the things that they're striking about is the BAME and female pay gap. And we got an email from the top telling us that the fact that the BAME wealth gap existed was simply not true. Those were the exact words. And, you know, it's funny because like we do have like lovely professors who really are trying to push this forward, and they're reading out things like emails in the BME gap out loud every single day. But it's also that email like almost represented this division that they're also trying to create between staff and students. And, you know, it just seems frustrating sometimes because like they're organizing teach outs and they've been talking about things like prevent, the BME gap. We're doing a lot of like decolonial like teach outs as well about which histories we need to include. But it feels like there's always passive-aggressive ways in which they make staff feel like, and students feel alienated from each other. So I think it's really important that we kind of break down those boundaries between staff, because there are staff who want to do stuff, but I think sometimes because of the top, it's really difficult to do that.
Thank you. We have 9 minutes left, so we're going to try and have 2 more comments. Let's go to you on the pink sofa. Yes?
Okay, so I'm going to try and keep this quick so I can speak. But there's so much to say in terms of gaslighting, responsibility, staff and student collaborations. I think it's extremely important because there's one thing that the top don't want is they don't want people getting comments from both sides because they like to play us off against each other. They thrive off that. But one thing that I will talk about is in Lancaster, because we're very much in our infancy and we're really not on the scale in terms of movement that you guys are all at. It's really amazing to see and inspiring. But I think one thing that I felt as a personal burden, and I'm sure you guys have felt as well, is that you have to consistently like remind white academics and white students why this is important. Like I had this conversation with my history professor, and she's a wonderful woman. She's very responsive and very accepting, but she didn't even think about how it felt as a person of color learning the curriculum that they learn. How it felt as a black student not hearing about any other history but the transatlantic slave history that looks like you. Like how does that, and why do we have to constantly like remind you of something that's so clearly evident in your curriculum, and it's such a burden.
Absolutely, thank you.
Right,
Monique.
Yeah, kind of hopping on from what you've both said. I think what underpins this, like to a great extent, is this like refusal to acknowledge the past, like because of the white guilt that's associated with colonialism and empire, which like all of us can attest to as the consequences from that. There's this absolute denial of what's happened and a refusal to engage with colonial narratives which still exist today. And so I feel like this issue is something that white people can't come to terms with and like won't come to terms with to a certain extent. And I feel like without like until people can like overcome this, then like there's nothing that we can do forward. But like at the same time, like it's not, even though that this denial exists, like it's not our responsibility to constantly teach people. Like I feel like especially within this country, like when you look at the history, but with like the history curriculums within secondary school, like there's no mention of empire, there's no mention of colonialism. And so whenever it comes to like talking about these things at university, especially like if you're within like the humanities and social sciences, it's always our burden to hold and to explain. And so I feel like it just needs to stop, basically.
I mean, these discussions are so multi-layered. I think we could do a day of just unpacking, yes, these concepts. We have very limited time. So I want to push all of the Decal groups to think further, to think into the future. What do we want next? What are the concrete goals of this collective movement that is taking place in atomized ways in different universities? What would that movement look like? What do you want from each other? What do you want going forward?
So I think that's a great place to kind of close this conversation, because we definitely don't want to close it on the topic of whiteness. Just like Dave said, decolonization is not a metaphor. Whiteness is not a noun, it's a verb. It's a way of doing something, right? So I think that related to all the conversations that we've been hearing so far, especially around visibilizing and having that being co-opted in a certain way by the institution, I just want to quote the example of a collective that we have now in UKC, which is the BAME Lgbti collective. And we formed that because there was really no space for people of color who are queer and trans to come together. And so far, the group has decided that we are not going to explain or educate people on trans or queer issues. We are going to build a space first where we can feel a sense of belonging, where we can share with each other and lift each other up, right? And I think there is a lot of political power to opacity, where you shut whiteness out of the room and you have conversations with each other, you build spaces with each other. And I think that there is a lot of burden that we feel to constantly visibilize and educate, but I think that parallelly we need to make these spaces that are away from the spotlight, away from the mics, where we can actually sit and talk to each other about it. So I think for a sense of belonging, for me at least, I just joined Kent in September 2019. I need to have students in my class who are sitting next to me and studying who look like me. I need to be teaching students who look like me. I need to see teachers who look like me getting promoted and becoming professors and vice chancellors of these universities. So apart from just looking like me, I think all of us have read Fanon, and we know that everyone who looks like us does not think like us and does not share our collective consciousness. So I need students and teachers who think through these issues with me and who are doing the work of decolonizing and not just looking, but also doing the work.
Brilliant. Any other contributions? Yes. Okay. Right.
So at our uni, the WOC lecturers have recently started a women's cafe. Essentially, it's a safe space for women of colour to just come, have conversations, kind of like group therapy in a way. And our aims really are to kind of get younger girls, younger women, and young people into these universities, because at the end of the day, I think we really need to think about education and decolonizing university. Decolonizing is not just in universities, but primary schools, secondary schools, sixth form. You get in primary school, you're already labelled as a black child, as a Muslim child. You get in secondary school, why minorities, always being put in seclusion. Then you get to A-levels, if you're in a predominantly white school, why are you being downmarked? Why are all the students, being told that they can't get into the top universities? So we kind of need to help younger children or young people know that they can understand the terms of what decolonizing means, and then know that there's support for them as well, and essentially help them get into these universities and these institutions.
Brilliant, thank you. So we need safe spaces to repair, to nurture, to re-energize, to rebuild, but we also want the institution to change. So what would that look like? In 2 minutes or less. Right at the back, we have the mic there. Could you pass it to the gentleman? Thank you.
Well, I think, as we all know, that the definition of racism is prejudice plus institutional power. So those who are in charge, those who are privileged, have all the institutional power. And the only way, I guess, for racism to die is for those who have the privilege to share that power. And obviously, I know it's not easy if you're in a privileged position to say, okay, could you give up your privilege to help benefit those who don't have that privilege? But I think a lot of people who are in the privileged position, whether they subconsciously or consciously try to hold on to their privileges, need to let them go and need to be willing to share them with others in order for us to all elevate together at the same time. So I'm just talking about in the context of society, but I don't see anything wrong with that being applied to university, to the curriculum. So, yeah.
Yep. Naima.
I think just sort of to summarize it all, I mean, obviously we are the decolonizing crew at the University of Kent. We've got Keele, we've got King's, we've got Queen Mary's in the building. And so what we were trying to highlight to all of you today is that none of our experiences are unique. Everything that we go through here at this university is similar to, as a matter of fact, probably every university across the country, if not the world. And so we don't want you or you guys or anybody to feel or think that we're just trying to decolonize education or, the higher education. The idea behind it is we are the minds of tomorrow. If we start here, it infiltrates into every branch of state, the executive, the judiciary, the police system. It will infiltrate into healthcare. It will infiltrate into the actual institutions that impact our lives on a day-to-day basis. We have to start at education, and then it goes everywhere else. So ideally, we stay together here. Today was a start, but it was only a start, and we work together as a collective to bring about a movement. It's something that we want to ideally make sure goes into every single institution.
Brilliant. Last few comments, please. Yes, thank you. Go ahead.
Just to add on to what Naima and, sorry, I forgot your name. Munda said, about privilege and also we are the future of tomorrow, basically. A lot of people's misconceptions is that we love talking about decal like this. Like, people need to understand, we, us brown and black people are just as uncomfortable as white people. talking about it. Like, even till now, it might not look like it, but I'm just very good at hiding it. My heartbeat, and I want to run away. Like, I'm having an official mini panic attack, like just talking about it, but it's important. Me, I might not look like it, yeah? I'm half European, so I'm half white, I'm half Asian, basically. And I know my own privilege with my own colleagues and friends from Keele. Like, I enjoy using my own privilege to let them speak. Like, I acknowledge that. Yes, I am so uncomfortable because I love chatting. Like, I love talking to people. But my privilege, because I look more like a baby, I guess, I don't know, people like kind faces, I will use that to my advantage to be like, oh, but have you met my friend here who's more knowledgeable than me because I'm not very good at remembering words. So it's just stuff like that. Look at your own whiteness. I looked at my own past history. It's not pleasant. Spanish, Philippines, we all get it. Colonization. Woo! So I will happily use my own examples. My ears are ringing, so I'm going to stop this now. But yeah, you get the point. I'm very uncomfortable. Be comfortable with that discomfort, and we will all progress for tomorrow.
Brilliant. And we'll end it there. We invite you to be unsettled. We invite you to be uncomfortable and to develop a decolonized consciousness. Thank you very much.